Would it be helpful for you to learn a quick, easy, simple way to do a little bit of studying right after you learn something initially and actually double your recall over a month later, just in time for finals? That's what we'll be talking about today. This comes out of the work of some German psychologists, specifically Hermann Ebbinghaus. Here's Hermann right here. Dr. Ebbinghaus was one of the first to apply scientific principles to the study of how our brains remember and, more importantly, how they forget. He came up with this curve known as the Ebbinghaus curve of forgetting. You can see on the vertical axis here percent recall, 50% recall, 100% recall. You can see on the x-axis time. We've got 1 minute, 1 hour, 3 hours a day, 3 days, 3 weeks, test day out there, maybe a month or 2 months away. Ebbinghaus originally tested himself with sets of nonsense syllables, but since his time, this experiment has been repeated literally hundreds of times. Sometimes they'll take students and have them listen to an hour-long lecture or read a textbook for an hour. So initially, that hour might look like this right here. We put an hour of study in there, and then we look at how quickly students forget that information over time. You can see over the first minute, your recall actually increases. That's because your brain's processing that information and putting it all together, and your recall actually improves. But an hour later, look where we are. We're down to 50% or below on our recall. Not so hot. A day later, wow, way down here. And 3 weeks later, or a couple of days before the test, when most of us actually break out those notes and start studying again, ooh, more like 15 to 14% recall of the information at that time, which means we've got to do a lot of work to get ourselves back up to 100% for that test. Ebbinghaus know about this as well. You can see here, right before the test, a couple of days before, you're having to do 45 minutes or so of study to get yourself back up to that 100% recall level. And of course, the curve starts over again. As soon as you stop studying that, the curve starts over again. And by the next day, 24 hours later, and you can see that this is very compressed over here, but 24 hours later, we're down to 75% recall or even less. This is exactly why people end up having to do all-nighters, because of course you didn't have 1 hour's worth of information to study for that big test. You had maybe 20 hours of lecture to study for, maybe another 20 hours to 40 hours of reading to study for. It's no wonder if for every one of those hours you initially spent studying, you have to spend an additional 45 minutes or so to get yourself back up to 100% recall. It's more than you can possibly do in 2 or 3 days. And so you end up staying up all night, missing sleep as well, which is also going to affect your test performance, and even then by the next day your recall has gone way down. So you end up doing a lot of studying and get very poor results. Ebbinghaus and other psychologists have figured out some easy things that you can do to fix that. Here's what they learned. If you do an initial study session, let's say within the first 15 minutes of walking out the door of that classroom or putting down that textbook, in the first 15 minutes you pull out those notes and force your brain to recall them. Maybe spend 5 or 10 minutes to try to get yourself up to 100% recall here. Look what happens to the curve. It starts over. And so even 3, 4, 5 weeks later, you remember more than twice as much as you did the other way, which means a lot less studying for you in order to be ready for those tests. That means fewer cram sessions, that means no all-nighters, that means you can be better rested and do better on those tests. It's a very simple, powerful, researched, proven way to add a lot of extra memory weeks and weeks later before the test comes and save yourself a lot of time and energy. Powerful stuff. You can find a lot more out at studyprof.com.